Chapter 208, Cry. Beep, beep, beep. The telegram set up in the captain's office suddenly came to life, seemingly having received a new telegram. But Klein and Leonard couldn't be distracted. They were counting the movements of the second hand on the clock as their red eyes welled up with tears. 10, 9, 8. Just then, Dunsmith carried the silver, bone-like square box into the reception hall with a solemn expression. Megos, who was pulling out clump after clump of blonde hair, tore a wound that was deep enough to show her bones. It was as though she was triggered by something. She suddenly stood and pointed at Dunsmith in his black trench coat. She shrieked, "You want to kill my child. You want to kill my child." Boom! The shrill and terrifying voice reverberated. Klein felt like he was being struck in the head with a sledgehammer. He suddenly forgot to count as he had a headache and felt dizzy. His vision went red, and there seemed to be liquid flowing from the tip of his nose. He subconsciously looked sideways, and he saw the corner of Leonard Mitchell's eyes. The tip of his nose and the corners of his lips were covered in fresh blood. His face was extremely pale, and his body was wavering as though he was about to fall. "I'm probably in the same state." Klein reined back his thoughts and continued to count in silence as he skipped 2 numbers. 5, 4. Struck by the terrifyingly sharp voice, Dunsmith's deep gray eyes were filled with red veins. Every single strand was crystal clear. The blood vessels in his face protruded out as well, every one of them like a poisonous snake. There was also a gurgle as red liquid flowed out of his ears as well. Despite that, he did feel dizzy. Other than his right hand pausing, his strong willpower drove him to press down on St. Selena's urn and open the lid. Inside the box, there was deep darkness. In the darkness, there was fine resplendent sand. The scene was magically beautiful, just like the cosmos being stored in a box. The surroundings suddenly became dark, and the darkness engulfed the entire reception hall. In the air, there were countless black, cold, and smooth threads floating. They surged towards Megos and entangled her almost instantly. It wasn't like a spider web, but more like the tentacles of some unknown creature. Megos had already torn out her right eyeball. It hung by a thin cord of flesh underneath her eye socket. She stared at Dunsmith with hatred as she roared, "You must die." Bang! Dun was cast away by a formless force and slammed heavily into the wall opposite. The wall cracked, and bricks were thrown up. He spat a mouthful of fresh blood onto the ground, but both his hands were still tightly holding onto St. Selena's urn. He held onto it for dear life and kept it from falling to the ground. Those countless black, cold, and smooth threads tightened and bound Megos firmly to the spot. No matter how much blight-tainted flames rose up suddenly, or how her skin began to secrete a liquid that smelt like brimstone, neither of those defenses dealt any damage to the threads holding onto her. 3, 2, 1. Klein and Leonard dashed out through the partition simultaneously. One of them was holding onto a warm, thin gold slice, and the other had already aimed his 5 fingers with the blood vessel thief wound around his left wrist at Megos. Megos, who no longer looked human, struggled as flesh protruded from both sides of her shoulders. They were a mixture of blood vessels and green veins, round like a child's head. Above the 2 heads, cracks rapidly spread and seemingly turned into a pair of eyes. Megos suddenly noticed danger approaching, and she opened her mouth. The corner of her lips cracked all the way up to her ears. She was going to deal the blaspheme curse to every enemy that attempted to harm her child. At that moment, Leonard clenched his left hand into a fist as his wrist made a half-turn. His pale face turned livid, and the vessels protruded like bunch of tiny poisonous worms. Megos's blaspheme curse was left stuck in her throat as it came to a sudden halt. She seemed to have lost the ability to speak and the ability to evoke curses. Klein seized the opportunity and muttered an ancient Hermes word in a deep voice. "Light. I want light, and there will be light." He suddenly felt the thin gold slice that was covered in mysterious patterns become boiling hot as he saw it amid a blinding light, as though it had become a miniature sun. Right on the heels of that, Klein injected more than half his spirituality into it and threw the flaring sun charm towards the restrained Megos. The reception hall instantly turned transparent as darkness and gloominess vanished simultaneously. The black fine threads that entangled Megos shrank as though they were instinctively avoiding something. But before Megos obtained her freedom, she already saw the sunlight. At some point in the fight, a hole had ruptured in the ceiling of the Blackthorn Security Company, and the hole went all the way to the rooftop of the third floor. The bright blue sky and glaring sunlight shined through simultaneously. The thin gold slice combined with the sunlight above Megos's and immediately expanded in size. It went from a spherical light to a sphere with countless flames spiraling around it. Rumble! The entire building shook vigorously, and the glass windows on the nearby streets shattered. However, the power of the spherical light concentrated its might at its core, without dissipating much. It enveloped Megos, and the light was so glaring that Klein, Dunn, and Leonard couldn't open their eyes. Klein held back his tears and looked through squinted eyes. He saw that the light had dispersed, but the flames were still soaring. Among them, there were many black ashes dancing in the air. Megos and the baby in her stomach were nowhere to be seen. Just like the coffee table, water glass, newspaper, and sofa in the area. Is it over? Did we finish the son of an evil god before it descended upon this world, taking his mother out at the same time? Klein still couldn't believe it. His experience of playing video games told him that the final boss couldn't be taken care of so easily. Suddenly, he felt goosebumps all over. His clown instincts told him that there was extreme danger approaching. Without thinking, Klein rolled to the left abruptly. Just then, a long arm with an extremely sharp white bone blade cleaved the spot, seemingly out of nowhere. The monstrosity had an abnormal beauty, and it floated in midair. It was unbelievably fast and almost impossible to dodge its attacks. Whoosh! Klein's clothing on the right side of his chest was ripped apart, his skin ruptured, and his flesh, along with his bones, was split into two. The wound was so deep that he could almost see one of his lungs. If it wasn't because he sensed danger approaching beforehand and dodged in time, that slash would have sliced him in half. But even so, Klein slowed down. Extreme pain filled his head and scattered his consciousness. At the end of the white bone blade, a figure rapidly flew out. If it wasn't for the bump on its stomach, perhaps no one could identify it as Megos. Her hair and dress had been burned entirely. The skin on her face and body was charred black and was peeling off, flake after flake. Her nose had melted, leaving only two small black holes behind. Her eyeballs were nowhere to be seen, and there were faint white flames dancing in the empty sockets. The two heads that had popped up from both sides of Megos's shoulders had been burned away. Her left arm had become the white bone blade that she was holding. It looked demonic, yet holy. Creak! As the ground shook, Megos ignored Dunn and Leonard, as well as the black, cold, and smooth fine threads that were hurtling towards her again. She phased over to Klein, who had come to a stop after rolling away. She aimed the white bone blade at Klein's neck and was about to slash down. Suddenly, she heard a voice that contained a rich, blasphemous tone. Submit! Leonard lifted his left hand and aimed his palm at Megos. The sealed artifact 2105 wrapped around his wrist had turned from a thick, pale, blood-tainted blood vessel into a crimson intestine that had expanded to the point that it looked ready to explode. With the aid of the blood vessel thief, Leonard had successfully stolen Megos's blaspheme curse and was attempting to use her power to seize control of her. Only an ability at her level was effective. Under the influence of the blaspheme curse, Megos bent her waist, and her knees were constantly trembling. Her motions came to a halt as the surrounding black threads surrounded her as though they had found a delicious prey. Klein also took the opportunity to roll in the opposite direction, leaving a trail of fresh crimson blood behind him. However, he got some reprieve from his extreme pain and reached his hand into his pocket. He took out the last flaring sun charm. He took the opportunity when Megos was stationary to finish her off, once and for all. If she were to hold out until the baby was born, the outcome would be beyond their imagination. Boom! Megos's head exploded on its own. Her charred skin and flesh flew in all directions. But her headless body seized the opportunity to shake off the effect of the blaspheme curse. Boom! Megos's charred body transformed into a projectile that shot towards Leonard. Since the blaspheme curse had been forcefully disrupted, Leonard was temporarily frozen on the spot. At that moment, Duns Smith was still holding onto St. Selena's urn tightly. His face was abnormally pale, and the black, cold threads that were created was still short of surrounding Megos. Creak! Megos slammed into Leonard, throwing him to the wall. The wall collapsed from the impact. Leonard's bones cracked, and there was blood spewing out from his mouth incessantly. Without even having the urge to struggle, he fainted instantly. Megos raised her white bone blade, but the countless black threads that emanated from St. Selena's urn enveloped her again and was about to bind her to the ground. Without the luxury of time to mind his injuries, Klein quickly took out the thin charm. Just as he was going to recite the ancient Hermes incantation, something suddenly sounded in the deep, dark, yet quiet room. Waya! It was the cry of a baby.